Health is Wealth with Dr. Mike is brought to you by Pizzaville, where you can enjoy the best gluten-free crust pizza the traditional Italian way, stone-baked. Customize your own gluten-free crust creation or choose one of our signature gourmet pizzas on an 11-inch gluten-free crust. Health is Wealth with Dr. Mike on 1059 The Region.
You're listening to 1059 The Region, and this is Health is Wealth with Dr. Mike Carrozza. I'm station manager Tina Cortez. Good morning, Dr. Mike, and happy Thanksgiving weekend.
Happy Thanksgiving weekend to you and to our listeners and to all the community. For sure, it's going to be it's beautiful, and we're going to have a nice, some time outside. Of course, as much as we can, right, Tina?
Absolutely. It's certainly glorious, fall weather out there. There's no doubt about it. But we are going to be celebrating differently, whether you're celebrating on Sunday or Monday. Not as many people around that Thanksgiving table this year, right, Dr. Mike?
Yes, there's silver linings to everything. I think we can always think about the good, Guess what? I mean, now you can have Thanksgiving twice, and you can probably focus a little bit more attention to those particular family members that maybe would feel like they didn't get that sort of attention in the years where you had 30 or 40 people over. So let's face it. I mean, keep it small, folks, and intimate. And I think it's going to be best for everybody. And it's, we're not saying, not have a function, but I mean, I think it's going to be better, Tina. I honestly think, and guess what? I mean, you don't have to cook these big feast meals that are going to feed, 100 people. So I think from a chef standpoint, I mean, I love to cook every Thanksgiving. And so for me, yeah, it's probably going in the kitchen twice, but just downscale it a little bit, switch it up. And maybe look at different options. One day I'm doing a roasted leg of lamb. Definitely posting that on Instagram and showing everybody how to do that on the barbecue outside on the grill one day. And then, we're doing the turkey because, the double turkey just makes the whole weekend a very sleepy, if you will, weekend, right, Tina? That's because of the tryptophan, right? That's the tryptophan in turkey. Everybody understands about the tryptophan, right? It's a serotonergic receptor, so it's going to stimulate. It's obviously stimulates like the serotonin, so the tryptophan actually is going to go to serotonin, and then serotonin is going to go to melatonin. Okay, folks. So for our listeners out there, the tryptophan doesn't make you sleep. It just feeds into the melatonin pathway that makes you nice and drowsy. And if you combine that with a glass of red wine, I promise you, it's lights out. So drink responsibly, folks, and eat responsibly as well. And turkey's a very good. It has a lot of amino acids, and it's very healthy.
And why is it so healthy for us? Less fat?
Well, the turkey itself, obviously, I try to discuss and teach all my patients and educate them on, obviously not consuming the fat and the skin of these animals. It's not very good. So when you take the skin off and you eat just the breast, yes, it's a significant amount of less fat. And then for the most part, if you get a free range or wild one, these animals are a lot healthier than, let's say, a chicken. And so then the amino acid spectrum is a little bit different, and it's got that wild gamey flavor. Now, some people don't like it, and they'll drown it in either cranberry sauce or gravy. But that flavor is usually acquired by a lot of people. So obviously, when you get down to the turkey and to the dark meat area, it's obviously more fat, and it gets more calorie laden, but. That's pretty much the gist of the turkey. But, I had a patient to come into my office this week, and they said, Dr. Mike, it's Thanksgiving. I'm going to start my diet on Tuesday. And I said, why? Like, why does it have to start on Tuesday? Like, in my opinion, you take away Easter, you take away Christmas, and you think of all the holidays, I think Thanksgiving is the healthiest of them all. It has the most amount of veggies that are quite colorful. So we're talking about the squashes and the yams, which are filled with they're yellow pigmented veggies. And sometimes you can make a real nice butternut squash soup to start. Very, very healthy, very high in things like vitamin A. Okay, very, very good for the body. Of course, vitamin A around this time is very important. It helps cycle things like the vitamin D. It works together and synergistically. These are immune-boosting fat-soluble vitamins. And so, and the turkey is roasted, so nothing is pretty much fried. And then, I always tell my patients, instead of doing that bread stuff in classic, maybe you can do a nice little brown rice pilaf or like some kind of brown rice. And then other than the potatoes, which doesn't have to be sort of filled with butter, maybe olive oil is a good alternative. And then the cranberry on the side, and then some gravy. Obviously, that's the fat drippings, and that's probably the worst part. But some people just can do it with some cranberry, some rice, and some wild yams and butternut squash, and away you go. And you're looking at a very, very healthy and nutritious meal. And I think that'll finish up real nicely with either an arugula salad or a mixed green or bitter green salad as well, especially around this time in the season. And then, of course, as my listeners know and my patients, I'm a big fan of apple cider vinegar, and that makes for a real nice fat-dissolving sort of vinaigrette that'll help you so that after your meal, you're not going to want to sit on the couch and be like stuffed. So that's my take, Tina.
Sounds like a good plan. When we come back, Outside the Box Cancer Therapies, the author of the book joins the show. This is Health is Wealth on 105.9 The Region. Stay with us.
Have a question for Dr. Mike? Call us at 416-335-1059. Tweet us at 1059 The Region or email us at info@1059theregion.com. More with Dr. Mike and Health is Wealth when we come back.
It was a rainy day in Pizzaville when we realised that our extra large pizza is 2 whole inches longer than the so-called extra large from the big pizza conglomerates. How do they even call theirs extra large when Pizzaville gives you 18 whopping inches, steaming hot? Because, let's be honest, who wouldn't want 2 more inches?
Pizzaville Stone-Baked Pizza. Fiercely Canadian. Authentically Italian.
Health is Wealth is back with Dr. Mike on 105.9 The Region.
You're listening to 105.9 The Region, and welcome back to Health is Wealth. And over to Dr. Mike with today's Naturopathic Roundtable. Over to you, Dr. Mike.
Well, thank you, Tina. I mean, we have some of my closest colleagues, and, I have Dr. Ryan Shakitano. He's on the show. And we also would like to welcome Dr. Paul Anderson, naturopathic doctor out of the U.S. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. Really am happy that we're able to do this and have this little round table. It's we can call it Naturopathic Medicine Week, if you will. But welcome all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start leading the pack here. I mean, Dr. Ryan and I can say, Dr. Ryan, obviously, naturopath, just like myself. We're here in Canada, Dr. Anderson, so we practice together. And, we pretty much came to the conclusion that you're pretty much the Michael Jordan of naturopaths in sort of the modern day. So we really look up to, we've traveled pretty much the entire country. To follow your work, we really much, not only myself, I think the profession has a huge respect and utmost appreciation for a lot of your work and efforts, and that's predominantly because you're pretty much evidence-driven. Is that correct, Dr. Anderson?
Yeah, I hope that's one of the reasons people like what I do, although I have a bad jump shot, so I don't know if Michael Jordan's a good. I'd never could figure the jump shot out, but no, I guess my personality is a little bit of a mix, which maybe is good for being a naturopathic doctor, where I'm extremely, just kind of rationally driven. I question a lot of things and look at them, but also I'm very open to, non-standard ideas about the way they might work. So maybe that's what people like.
So just for our listeners to get them back to understand, because we've had you on the show before, I just want to get our listeners, for those people that are tuning in, first of all, you are a naturopathic doctor. Where do you practice? So where are you from?
I am. I live and work in Seattle, Washington. So, state of Washington. Been here for about 16 years. I started practicing in the state of Oregon, just a little bit south of Washington, and that was a long time ago.
And you are, just for our listeners as well, I mean, naturopathic doctors in Canada and naturopathic doctors in the U.S., I mean, you understand this gap that's a little different. I mean, can you explain to our listeners pretty much the role of a naturopathic doctor, and especially one in which in the U.S.?
Yeah, we have a little, I think we have similar variation in the U.S. To what you have in Canada, but because in the U.S., every state has a different practice act for the naturopathic doctors. And so, for instance, in Washington or Oregon or Arizona, I practiced in all three of those states. The practice act is very broad, and I can practice very similarly to a GP, medical doctor. And then other states, it's really quite limited. And so in a lot of cases, especially when I'm teaching, around the country.
Let me hijack this conversation. We'll be here all day. But just along those lines, what were some of your biggest influences in terms of how you practice your medicine? Could be current practitioners, past practitioners, different resources, anything you'd want to pass on. Because Dr. Mike said we look up to you quite a bit, and it'd be interesting to hear who you look up to or who influenced you so much.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I come from a medical family. My dad's a retired physician, and my mom has passed away, but she was a nurse. And so I grew up. Most of the adults I knew were medical doctors, and not all of them, but a lot. I had a lot of influence there. And in those days, like in the early '60s and '70s, it was a lot different being a doctor than it is now. So I was really heavily influenced by that. My plan was to actually go to allopathic medical school and kind of join that world. But what I found and what I noticed was my children are all grown up. They're like in their 30s and old and all that. But when the older ones were little, we started to have some health problems with the older two, and we kind of went through the mill, and the allopathic system wasn't serving them very well. And my mother actually said, I know this naturopathic doctor, and you should at least talk to him because he might have some answers for you. And I met this guy. I think he graduated in the late '60s, probably. And I was just so impressed by two things. One was his knowledge of medicine in general, but the other was his ability to relate things to things that I knew about, like physiology and biochemistry and stuff like that. But his answers were completely different from what my allopathic people were giving. And our kids saw some real big health benefits, and so then I started to see this guy about my allergies and all this stuff. And the more I did it, the more I thought, I've never heard of a doctor like this, but I can do this. So I sort of changed my trajectory at one point. And so I actually had a very interesting. I preceptored and worked with a lot of older medical doctors when I was training. Actually did hospital-based rotations and stuff like that before anybody else really ever did. And not that I wanted to, fully practice that way, but I wanted to be exposed to that side. And so they were a big impact just on being, the way they looked at medicine. But then the naturopathic doctors, that I saw it was a very eclectic group, and more than having like one person that I kind of followed or learned most of my stuff from, I really just, looked at the way that some of the old timers practiced and tried to pick the very best out of it I could, and then really from there, everything else I learned was from patients.
That's awesome, yeah, and that's part of the beauty, I think, of being a naturopath is we learn so much from our patients, and part of our profession, I found this in my early days of practice, Dr. Mike, I'm sure can touch on this as well, but we end up getting quite complex cases because a lot of times patients have come in and said, look, I've tried everything, I don't really know what a naturopath does, but let's give this a go kind of thing, and it challenges us because we get such complex cases.
Yeah. I think that is one thing I figured out really early on in practice was, as opposed to say a GP, medical doctor, right out of the gate we get the weirdest and most unusual cases, and you either have to learn real quick or try not to see those people, and I think that's why our profession seems to be constantly learning, is because those people come to us. I mean, that's one of the big reasons we exist as a profession, I think.
Definitely, 100%.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with that. I mean, I think we definitely got the projects, and I guess it's mostly regarding some of the cases that we get that are quite complex, and there's many facets to these cases as well. So there could be, usually, like, for example, if somebody has a thyroid problem, they usually most definitely and obviously have a gut issue, and then that could supersede or coincide with their adrenal issues. So I mean, there's many different facets, and obviously we all can appreciate that. And just for our listeners out there, I think the most important thing with naturopathic medicine is our treatment protocols, and I think that's what we want to talk mostly about with you, Dr. Anderson. So, your specialty is IV therapy, and I say that with respect, and because you've been doing it for so long. I mean, and so let's touch base on some IV protocols that you do, because I think pretty much your special focus, I believe, because you just have a book that came out. I think it just came out this week, correct?
Yeah. Yes. True.
And the book's on oncology, right?
Yeah, it's the second one in about cancer. Yes.
And cancer's a focus of yours.
Yes, really since the beginning, pretty much my practice was focused on chronic illness, but two parts. One were people with cancer, which really is a chronic illness, and the other were people with very unusual non-cancer chronic illness. So cancer became a huge area of focus. And then I was involved in integrative medicine cancer research for 5 years as well, a while back. So yeah, that really, most of my practice became cancer patients.
And can you just talk about the book a little bit? I mean, I love the sort of the picture on the front, because it's pretty much, it explains, really just obviously there's some deep waters. I know I can probably take a guess at why you picked that sort of life preserver, or that throwing somebody, I guess, you're in the middle of a water, and it's sometimes these waters are uncertain, and maybe they'll need some kind of life-preserving mechanism. So can you just explain the theory behind the book?
Yeah, that's the graphic is kind of interesting. So the first cancer book I did was called Outside the Box Cancer Therapies with a friend, Dr. Mark Stengler. And that one we focused on naturopathic therapies for cancer. And in the couple of years since that was written, I started thinking, the other side of the cancer equation is really what the patient and their family goes through when they get the diagnosis of cancer. And that's beyond their therapies. It's really, what do you do on the inside when you get this really bad news? I've never met anyone that wanted to be diagnosed with cancer. And so the idea behind the two kind of life preserver things there, the left half is like the one on the dock or on the boat you throw when someone falls in the water, and that's kind of the emergency side. And then the other one is more of like a floaty, like the kids would use. And the idea there is it still helps you stay up, but it's a more peaceful event. So the subtitle on the book's just called Cancer, but it's the journey from diagnosis to empowerment. And what I noticed in all these years working with people is everybody starts with the shock of, oh no, I didn't want to get a cancer diagnosis. What do I do? And if they have a way to navigate the trip from that shock and, disbelief, anger, all those things, and become empowered, they actually do better quality of life-wise and in most cases survival-wise. So it's about kind of getting there, whether it's, you, the cancer patient, or your loved one or support person. It's all important to go through this, through that journey.
And I think that's amazing. I mean, and for our listeners out there, if you see the book, I mean, it's pretty much, there's a life-preserving life preserver that's like obviously the donut-shaped ones, and it's cut in half. And on one side, there's, like you mentioned, the one that you would see at the side of a dock in maybe a lake or off a boat, and the other one it's like a floaty that's a little bit. But I guess the idea is, navigating these waters that, you're pretty much dropped in a huge body of water and pretty much nowhere else to swim. So I guess this will give a lot of patients some hope, and especially with your extensive research. Now, let's talk about the immune system, because this is really big right now. And you mentioned you're in Washington. Of course, we all just heard the news about the president getting diagnosed with COVID. And this whole thing, we have to touch on it. So, and I know you've done some extensive research on COVID and the immune system, because that's pretty much what your focus is. So can I, tell us what's going on right now in the state of Washington. I know you guys were one of the first states where you had some patients diagnosed, and then how is it now?
Yeah, I don't think any of us in January would have predicted this year, 2020, to go the way it went. So we, I think in February, identified the first U.S. patient that we know of. I mean, there may have been others, but real close to us. They were in a hospital about 5 miles from where I live. And so that kind of put my state in kind of in full COVID mode early on. And if you go back there to February, March, we didn't know. We didn't know really how it was transmitted, how bad it. We didn't know much except for what we knew from China. And so back then, something happened that I again never would have imagined, and that was, because of my involvement using intravenous vitamin C with cancer patients and doing research with that, an international society asked if I would do an update on vitamin C and COVID specifically. And so what I did was I got electronically in touch with the expert group in Wuhan, China, that had all the patients, and they were using IV vitamin C, and I got all of their work translated and looked through it, and so I presented that, and you can still for free watch that presentation. But I think the important thing around that was, it's easier in other countries to add things in the hospital than in North America. That's my experience over time. But what they did, and since then, because of that, and then I published a paper for hospitals on how to use it in the hospital, IV vitamin C. What they really did was they gave a continuous infusion of vitamin C that wasn't, they call it high dose. It wasn't terribly high dose, but the important part, it was continuous. And we humans don't make vitamin C in our bodies, so we have to have it. When we're sick, our levels get very low or absent, and as soon as our levels drop, our ability to respond to illness gets very, very bad, and we get very inflamed and all that. So if you take COVID illness and you get people who are in the hospital, who are the sickest ones, their vitamin C drops really quickly, and then that puts them prone to a lot of the really bad side effects. And even in the Chinese, cohort, their first cohort was about 370 people, in the hospital, 50 of whom were very sick, and they gave continuous IV infusions of vitamin C along with all the regular drugs. Those 50 people, none of them died, and they all got out of the hospital sooner than the other folks. And what I've seen, although it's been very, American hospitals anyway, have been very resistant, but we have cases and we have hospitals spread around the country that are doing IV vitamin C. And we just had a gentleman that I was helping the hospital with their care. And every time they'd put him on the vitamin C IV, his inflammatory markers would drop. Then they would take him off because they wouldn't listen to me. And his inflammatory markers would go up and he'd get sicker, and then they would go back down. So it's sort of, and the guy is alive. He got out of the hospital, and the whole hospital staff said there's no reason that guy should be alive. And I'm hoping that they take the lesson, that the vitamin C was a good addition. But, it's one of those things where it's this crossover of what you and I do and what can help people with, these sort of new novel illnesses where the immune system goes crazy, to kind of get the immune system back into, kind of on balance.
And then it's different when you go, just because we're talking about the immune system, and we'll get more into it in another segment, but, because you mentioned intravenous vitamin therapy, predominantly, just for our listeners, because people can just take vitamin C orally, but obviously there's a concern and there's bowel tolerance. Can you just explain that a little for our listeners?
Yeah, it's, for prevention, oral vitamin C works really quite well because the amount you take, and digest every day is about probably what your body needs. Now, there's, as you mentioned, bowel tolerance. Most people have heard of or maybe experienced if they take too much vitamin C, they might get diarrhea or loose stools, etc. But what they'll also notice is if they're getting sick or they're fighting with a cold or, a virus or even a bacteria, your bowel tolerance will rise, and so the amount of vitamin C you can take goes up when you're sick because your body needs it. So there's what we've seen as a model and what we've seen in Asia and actually some European countries is to keep people out of the hospital, they would have them take vitamin C orally, kind of split up through the day. So it's not one big dose. It's kind of every meal they take a bit. But in the hospital, when you're really sick and you need hospitalization, the IV goes around your digestive tract, so there's none of this bowel tolerance issue. It's going right in your blood, and that allows you to keep your levels higher without any concern about digestion and absorption and that sort of thing.
Great conversation, gentlemen. That's our show for this week. Previous episodes of Health is Wealth on 1059theregion.com. Thanks for listening.
Connect with us on Twitter at 1059theregion or call 416-335-1059 or email info@1059theregion.com. This is 1059 The Region. Health is Wealth is brought to you by AppleMed Clinic, located at 3560 Rutherford Road, Unit 45. AppleMed takes a results-driven approach to patient care. Remember, an AppleMed day keeps illness away.